Hello and welcome to this episode of Chasing Creativity. I'm Kiran Manral, and today I have with me the very lovely Priya Malik. We've seen her in Big Boss. We've seen her evolve from somebody who was in a reality show to somebody who is probably one of the most popular spoken word artists today. Welcome to the show, Priya.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
It's so lovely to meet you after I don't know how many years. We've lost count of the years, I think.
Yes.
And life has changed so much, I think, from the time I met you back then. But I'm very curious, Priya. I'm going to go right to the beginning.
Sure.
How did a girl from Dehradun go to Australia, enter Big Brother Australia, then come to India and enter Big Boss India, and then go on to become
a poet?
A poet.
So weird, right?
This is an analyst in the middle of all this.
Yes.
So just let us know how that entire very strange trajectory happened.
Yeah, it is a strange trajectory when you think of it. I always tell people that I'm like a cat. I've had 9 lives, and this is the 9th leg of life now.
Okay.
And this is the most wholesome that I've ever felt, professionally, personally, emotionally. So finally, after so many detours, I think I finally realized A, who Priya is, and B, what Priya wants, which was also always something that really intrigued me growing up. I would always ask myself, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And those questions were always very evasive. And I think a part of the identity crisis that I went through was these 2 questions, what do I want from life and who am I? Just the entire contemplation on who am I. And then life also happened, and I let it happen for some time. And then I tried to control it, and then I realized there's no way of controlling your life. You have to let life happen to you, and then I let go again. So yeah, it's a very long story, but it has been a bit of a detour because I feel I was trying to figure out who I am. And I don't know how the reality shows happened in the middle.
There was some comedy. There was some stand-up, I think.
Yes, I've done stand-up as well. Even before spoken word, I've done stand-up actually. And I did pretty well in it. I don't even know how again. But I think it was poetry that I kept coming back to.
Okay.
Because from the age of 12, I've been writing my own poems. And from the age of 5, I was reciting other people's poetry. I would step up on stage and recite poems in a very animated way as a kid and do all of that. So I think throughout all of these things that you mentioned, poetry was always a constant. And I think that when that realization set in, and when I realized that this can be something that if I really, devote myself to 200%, this can become my life. And guess what it did?
It did. You manifested it.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yes.
I've, as somebody who writes, writing is a very solitary job.
Yes.
Very solitary. As a poet, again, it's a solitary job.
Yeah.
You write, you have to get inside yourself. You have to be locked. You have to be cloistered. You have to feel your emotions, whatever. Then you go and perform. Luckily, I don't have that. I'm very grateful I don't have that. But to put yourself out there, and you said you've been performing from a very young age. Did you ever find that dichotomous? The public persona of somebody who performs and private person who's writing this?
I think with me, I was always a performer as well, because my love for poetry began with those performances, with stage poetry. And I was a very little kid back then. I was like probably 5 or 6 years old. I would go on a mic, and my school was very much into elocutions. So I would recite, oh, captain, my captain. That I think I must be around 10 years old when that happened. But even from like a very young age, when I was 5 or 6, I was still always reciting the nursery rhymes. Then I moved on to the classic poetry. Then when I was a teenager, I was then, reciting Sylvia Plath, and the likes of all of those. So with me, performance was always a part of my writing process. Every time I would write, I would want to speak it out. I would want to express it. So with me, that has always been the case. Even now, when I write in order for it to be spoken, not always in order for it to be read. So if you read some of my poems, without hearing me perform those poems, they will always feel a little bit out of place. But when you hear them, you'll be like, oh, okay, here are the pauses, here's the beat, here's the meter. So all of that comes in when I infuse it with my speech. Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Can you remember, do you have a memory of your first spoken word performance, somewhere you spoke your recited your first poem
Yeah.
in public?
Yeah. So, as I said, I've been writing for a very long time, but I did not perform my own poems. I was always performing other people's poetry. I never even knew that spoken word was a thing. So, I discovered spoken word over 10 years ago. I think it was 2013. Late night, I was going through a terrible phase in my life. I was largely depressed, and must have been like 2 o'clock in the morning or something. And I was on YouTube, and I came across Neil Hilborn's OCD, the poem. And I saw the poem, and I was like, oh my God, like it punched me in the gut. Like I felt everything about that poem. And then I went through the spiral of Andrea Gibson and, every spoken word poet from New York. And they were doing things on button poetry, which is where the spoken word movement had largely started on YouTube. And I was like, I can do this. I was like, I have so many poems. And I love reciting poems. Why don't I marry the two together? And as destiny would have it, I wrote spoken word poetry, Australia, because I thought maybe they're doing something here too. And in Adelaide, within 3 days, there was a competition.
Okay.
And I lived in Adelaide, and it was the Australian Poetry Slam, which you could participate into. And I put the two and two together, and I performed a very angry breakup poem. It is now out on Unerased Poetry. It is called When He Told Me He No Longer Loved Me. And I went and I participated, and I won. And I was
That was your
like-
very first
that was-
performance.
yes.
And you won.
I won that round.
Wow.
They called it heats. There were different heats. So I won that heat. And I was straight in the state finals. And I was like, oh. So, validation happened and the expression happened. So everything just started coming together. And it was like blood on my tongue again. I remembered the young Priya because for 10 years I hadn't been on stage from 18 to 28. It was just life happening. And I was like, I love this. And I kind of just wanted that to be my life, but didn't know how to figure it out. And that took me another couple of years.
It took you another couple of years.
Yeah.
And in those couple of years, a lot of things happened.
Yes, a lot of things happened. I moved back to
To
India.
India.
Big Brother happened. Big Boss happened. Oh gosh, don't even get me started. And then I still did not think of it as a career. I still thought poetry will be something I do on the side. And I was trying to do more mainstream things. I was doing television. I was doing news. I have been a Diane on a show.
Yes, apparently I read that and I was like, I cannot imagine Priya as a dancer.
Yeah,
She's
no, I had a very
sweetest
long choti with like special powers. So I have been like a Jill of so many trades, but I realized that I can be the master when it comes to poetry. And when the first brand collab happened, it was my 30th birthday. I was at Kala Ghoda Cafe with Karan and we were having lunch. And I got a phone call from Unerased Poetry and they said, hey, your poems, because my poems were already viral by then, 2 or 3 of them. And they said, there's a brand, they want to pay you, a couple of lakhs and they want you to write a poem. Can you do this in 24 hours? I said, what?
Couple of lakhs in 24 hours? Yes.
Yeah. They said you have to write it and shoot it and it needs to go live tomorrow.
Wow.
And everything just happened within 24 hours. And that poem was my first poetry collab.
Lovely.
Yeah. And that's when I put the 2 and 2 together and realized this can be a career. Because when I started, I was just doing it out of sheer love for it. Yeah.
Talking about career and, poetry is ethereal, it comes from the soul, all of that. When we talk about the commercial aspects of it, there's a reluctance to talk commercials.
Yes, I just did.
You did. And I'm so glad you did this because I want to talk about how difficult it is to make a living as a poet, as a creative person. But it is possible, right? It
Yes.
definitely is possible.
Yes.
And it is important. So, when we marry the commercial with the creative, do you feel at any point does it impinge on the creative? Do you feel at any point that your creativity sort of gets barricaded, blockaded, or any sort of way? Are these things that you encounter?
Yes and no. I feel the commercial aspect actually helps in keeping it alive as well. Gulzar Sahab would not be writing poems and songs if he wasn't getting paid for them. He was painting cars at a car repair shop when he first started. And from the moment he started getting paid, that's when he became who he is today. And I think that's a very important thing to remember. I think we often embarrass ourselves when we make money out of art. You know, अपनी कला से जब आप कमाने लगते हो, आपको लगता है कि, oh my God, am I doing justice to this? Am I becoming too commercial, too mainstream? I think there is nothing more successful than being able to make money from an art form that comes naturally and organically to you. For me, that's the pinnacle of being a successful artist, that this is what is running your household. Yes, it is important to not get lost in the commercial aspect. So if I'm writing for 5 brands at a stretch in 1 month, I will also make sure that I write 1 or 2 pieces which are just for me. There's no brand attached to it. They're for myself to be able to connect to my audience and to perform my own poems. So as long as I keep that balance alive, I think I will be okay. The day I'm only writing for brands and not writing for myself, that's the day I would have lost that balance. So I look at it as a mark or an attribute of success, because I think it is very essential that artists do get paid for their art and are not embarrassed at getting paid for their art, and not embarrassed at asking to be paid for their
Very
art as
important.
well. Because I think the reason it took me more than 30 years to become a poet is because growing up in a middle class household, you're never told that you can become a poet. You're told you can become an engineer, you're told you can become a doctor, a teacher, a banker, because those are paid jobs. When you tell them, hey mom, I'm thinking I'm going to become a poet, you're told that no, how will you run your house or how will you make money? That's the first question. So it's about time that that changes. And I'm very happy that we're living in a generation where young kids see influencers and poets and comedians and spoken word artists, and they know that this can be a full-time career and it is not just something on the side, the way probably you and I grew up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you brought this up. What is your process like? Now, of course, you have a small baby and, you know,
Yes.
everything has been turned topsy-turvy.
Yeah.
But before that, how did you work? Because days are busy, there's shoots,
Yeah.
there's performances. But to take time away to write, how does it happen for you?
You know, the last poem I wrote was at 4 o'clock last morning.
Okay.
Actually, this morning. Yeah, it was today. See, I've lost track of time. The last poem I wrote was at 4 o'clock today morning with Zoravar in my lap while putting him to sleep. And he was in bed. I had one hand free and I was typing with that hand. So I'll tell you how this happens. So with me, the process is that a thought will take home in my place, have a place of almost home in my heart, you know. And that thought will keep going and going and going, but it will be just a thought. Sometimes it is just a line. For instance, one of my most popular poems, मैं 2019 में 1999 ढूंढ रही हूँ. So that line or that original thought about finding the 90s will be in my heart and my head and my soul. And it keeps manifesting itself as much as it possibly can. And then one day, it's like a gush of water, or, you know, to say it in a better way, it's like Ahmed, you know, that thought comes to you, or that poem comes to you. And one day I will just sit and it will take me a couple of minutes and I'll type it out. And that's exactly what happened last night. That thought of that particular poem had been in my heart for a very long time. And I just wrote it out within a couple of minutes. With one hand, I was tapping, and it's done.
Talent.
So with me, it is that. I need that thought to marinate for some time. And once it is fully marinated, it will come to me.
Okay.
I know it will come to me. And when it does, I also know it's time.
So when it comes, you let it flow through you.
Yeah,
You're
it's
not
like giving
fighting
birth.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know, for the lack of a better metaphor, because I've just given birth, right? So you are in labor with that poem. You know, initially for the first few months or days or weeks or hours, that poem is taking shape. The hands, the legs, the heart, the kidney, the liver. And once the baby is ready, once the poem is ready, whether you like it or not, it will push itself out of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can't fight it, you can't stop
It's
it.
ejection reflex, as they say in labor.
Also, Priya, you write in 2 languages.
Yes.
And you're one of the rare people who is very good at both.
Thank you.
And is there a time when you feel, how do you decide that this is the language I'm going to do this in? Does it, I mean, do you have to decide that I'm going to write this in English, I'm going to do this in Hindi, this thought has come to me in this language? But maybe it will be better in the other language. Does that also happen?
I have started leaning more towards Hindi, Urdu, Hindustani, so to speak,
Hindustani,
nowadays. I no longer enjoy writing in English very much.
Okay.
But there are some poems that I know will be better in English than Hindi. Like there was this poem that I did called I'm Not a Cool Girlfriend. And I know that writing that in Hindi would be such a disservice to that phrase because it was just the whole idea of being a cool girl or being a cool girlfriend. So I know that poem, I would be able to express it better in English. The same with one of my first poems, when he told me he no longer loved me. I don't think Hindi would have done justice to that particular thought process. So I don't consciously make that decision. I think for me, it's a very logical decision that, okay, yeah, this is an English thought that has come to my head. The thought has popped in English. Let me do this in English. Or the thought has popped in Hindi. Let me do this in Hindi. And once in a while, I mix the two as well.
Okay.
There are a lot of pieces of mine, like Broken But Beautiful is one of them, which is half English, half Hindi, and it kind of flows and, ebbs. It has its own trajectory. That I just let that flow while I'm doing the writing process.
Okay.
Yeah.
While performing, how important is it for the audience's energy to bounce back at you? Does that affect the performance in any way? How does it work for you? Because we know comic and stand up.
Yeah.
That's so very essential. Theatre is essential.
Yeah.
Spoken word, you're reciting your poems. Do you have to feed off the reaction of the audience as well?
Yes, you do. The snapping, that's a very essential part of spoken word poetry. So just like in comedy, your purpose is to elicit laughter, which is a very organic reaction. You can't force people to laugh. In the same way, when you're a singer or a dancer, people will clap in the end, whether they like it or not. But with spoken word poetry, you have to elicit the
snaps,
ahs, sometimes the ooh, sometimes the sometimes the vah, sometimes the clap, and sometimes the snaps. So when you're performing and you're on stage and you know that is happening, or if you see someone tearing up at a particular poem, that is extremely essential. Also, though, I have realized in the last few years, if the audience are completely silent and you're reciting a very serious poem, or you're talking about a topic which is a little bit more serious than usual, that is also okay. I used to really try to feed off all the snaps and the ahs and the ums and the vahs, but I've also realized that some poems, it is nice for the audience to just be able to simmer into the poem and not have to constantly give you that.
Okay.
So I've become okay with not having that as well, because I understand that they're really into it. I think by now I can tell that they are into it. And touch wood, they are into it.
They are into it.
I haven't had a performance in the last few years where I've been like, oh, I've lost them. I touch wood, I haven't. But it can happen, of course. It can happen to the best of us. Yeah.
May it never happen. You also, as you said, you did the role of a Dayan.
Yeah. Dukayan, actually, it was called.
Dukayan.
I had two heads.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
My goodness gracious. Did you never think of going full-fledged into the acting world?
No, it's not for me. I mean, I did tell, I'm sure this has been said before, and you have heard this before as well. You work for the stomach and you work for the soul. With me, when I did that show, I was paying my rent in Mumbai and I was trying to set up a life here. I was doing so many things. And I know it comes easily to me to act as well. So I did it because I knew that I had to pay the bills. Did I do it out of my love for acting? The answer is no. Do I still enjoy acting? The answer is yes. But it is not where my heart lies. I can still do it, but I would not actively chase it or actively seek it anymore. Now that I know that I can fill my heart and my stomach and my soul with poetry. Yeah.
Lovely. A lot of our writing happens through life experience and through, your first spoken word, which got you the award, was from life experience.
Yes.
And
Heartbreak.
Heartbreak, as does so much of your other work.
Yeah.
Have there been any instances where, something has affected you so profoundly, but you've not been able to put it down?
Yes. That's a great question. I recently did a piece which was about sexual abuse, and it took me so many years to talk about it. I just kind of buried it in such a place where I would never want to even dive into that crevice of my mind and talk about it. That was one. And there are a few other things as well that I think are yet to be spoken, which I think with time, or maybe with age, or maybe when I come to terms with it and I have processed it, I would talk about. But you're right, sometimes things do affect you so profoundly that you don't want to or can't write about them. But I've also experienced in the last few years that until I write about them, and in my case, until I perform them or express them or say it out loud, I'm not able to process them anyway. So, yeah.
To close that chapter, you
Yes,
need to
I need to let it out.
say it.
Need to give birth. Yeah.
I love the way we're coming back to the give birth metaphor all the time.
Yeah, I have to be pregnant with a poem. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have 2 books in the pipeline.
Yeah.
What are they about?
So one is actually both a collection of poems. One is called Ishq Ke Saath Padav, which is with Vani Prakashan. That was one of my first books, supposed to be out a couple of years ago, but I'm still getting there. 70% done. There's still a little bit of work to be done. And then there is a book of English love poems called For Those Who Love Too Much, which is with Westland. And I'm hoping that will be out soon as well. As soon
That's
as
submitted
I can.
already?
No,
No.
not from my end, no. I think I need to, I realized the other day that I had so much time before I gave birth to my baby. And now that I have given birth to the baby, there is less time. But I am trying to be a little bit more constructive with my writing habit, because I write off my whims. I think I need to become a little bit more disciplined and a little bit more structured in my writing. Maybe I can have 1 hour every day, which is possible, even with my baby being in the picture, because I do have a lot of help at home. I think I need to do that in order to finish my books. Yeah, it's essential.
It's very interesting you say this, because Anita Desai,
Yeah.
she wrote in the intervals when her children were at school.
Ah,
And during the summer vacation, she didn't do any work.
right.
She just sort of did a first plotting of whatever she was going to
Yeah.
write once school reopened. And for the longest time, her children didn't know that their mother was a writer of books.
Wow.
And after her children grew up, went out of school, she said, I missed the time when I didn't have time. I was much more
Wow.
productive then. So,
I understand. I get it. Yes.
because now, given that spoken word is getting so popular, how do you see it evolving in India? It's going to small towns already. It's all over the place. It's also getting very crowded.
Yeah.
What do you see spoken word evolving into?
I think it was nice that I was one of the first spoken word poets in the country, and I think at that time all of us were doing it just out of sheer love for poetry. There was no money to be made. We didn't even know that brands wanted to invest money into spoken word. That wasn't even a thing. It was unheard of. And at that time the scene was obviously less crowded, as you said. It has changed, because now a lot of people come into the scene for the sake of being viral. And when you're writing a poem with the thought ki mujhe viral hona hai, I feel you are A, limiting your craft, and B, you might get viral with that poem, but can you make a career out of it? So I've seen it evolve in that way as well. A lot of people now want to come because they think we have these really fancy, perfect lives, which is also not true. We have months wherein there are no brand collabs, and then there's a month when there are 5 of them, and you're doing what you're doing with it. I like seeing new people on the scene. I don't mind it at all. And I also like seeing, new work on the scene. And a lot of older poets who started off when I started off have also kind of, gone into oblivion. I have seen that happen as well. Some of them have taken up jobs. Some of them have branched out into other things like direction and media, so to speak. I'm okay with whatever's happening on the scene. I think as long as I'm only focusing on my journey, I'm fine. When I see another person doing well, I'm happy for them. When I see another person not doing well, I talk to them and ask them how they're doing. So I think I've really been at peace with my journey in this. And I try to not get affected by what else is happening on the scene. Or is it even a scene? Or is it not? All of those questions. And people do ask me that often, but I don't really get into it. But when it comes to where I see the spoken word era in India going, it's great that brands have latched onto it, but I still think it needs a lot of structuring. Like in Mumbai, we still have some structure or a scene, so to speak. In other cities, we don't yet. So that needs to be done. Yeah.
What about audiences? Do you think audiences are growing fast enough with the scene? The scene, quote unquote.
Yes, they are. I've done a few sold out shows in the last 1 year in Mumbai itself at the NCPA, and I've got another one coming up now. So when I see that, it's really nice. It's also really nice to see a very large demographic when I look at my audience. I have people from the age of 18 to 80 at a spoken word poetry show. And it's really lovely to see that. You know, you have 18-year-olds, you have 20-year-olds, you have the mid-30s, you have the couple in their 40s, and then you have these very old people who have either come with their sons or daughters or their family has brought them. So there is that range, especially at my shows. That's the truth. And I love seeing that it is impacting people of all ages, all demographics, and people that I would not expect to see at a poetry show. Because I think back in the days when you looked at a mushaira or a kavi sammelan, you would always see some specific type of people dressed specifically, who talk in a particular manner, who are of a particular age range. All of that was very apparent. With spoken word, you could see that it is, you know, delving into more areas when it comes to the kind of people that it is bringing to the shows. So it's quite fun to watch that as well. Yeah.
I'm glad you spoke about mushairas and, you know, kavi sammelans, because we've always had such a rich culture and heritage of that. And somehow it became uncool. And sadly enough, because I mean, we grew up seeing them on television. In Bombay, there wasn't so much of it. But I remember
in Delhi, it was quite a
it's
thing.
quite huge.
Yeah.
But why did this happen, do you think? Why did they become suddenly uncool, so to speak?
They're becoming cool again,
They're
thankfully.
becoming cool again, okay.
It's all coming back.
I mean, Jashn-e-Rekhta is huge.
Jashn-e-Rekhta is there, you know, and I've been a part of Jashn-e-Rekhta as well, and there was a lot of controversy when I was invited to Jashn-e-Rekhta, because a lot of the traditional people from the Shairi circuit and the audience and the listeners thought that there is no place for a spoken word poet to be on it. And it was quite, you know, it was very vehement. It was very strange to see the amount of, you know, the vitriol that was being forced on me. So I understood that there is that divide between traditional shires and spoken word poets, and people feel it can't be bridged. And I'm one of those people whose poetry has some Urdu thrown in, you know, whether my talaffuz is not, whether I'm doing the qaf right or not, you know, I don't think about all of that. I'm just performing, I'm doing all of that. And my audience are a little bit of the Shairi audience, but also the non-Shairi audience and all of that. So, yeah, there is a divide, and then it needs to be cool again. And I have performed with a lot of Shairs now. I was a part of, then I got invited by Jashn-e-Rekhta again 2 years ago, and I was a part of the Khawatahin Mushaira, which was like, you know, these were like proper poets, the Sher-o-Shairi wale poets. And then there was me with a little bit of English and a little bit of Hindi and a little bit of Urdu.
I love it.
And, you know, all of that. So I like that the scene is kind of trying to become one. There are people, there are audiences and artists who do try and divide these scenes. But I think it's about time that it becomes one scene. I met this particular Shair at the airport over a year ago. Non-pregnant days, and
life gets divided into
non-pregnant is like before Christ, after Christ. Yeah, mine is BZ and AZ, so before Zoraber. And he came up to me and he said, you know, Priya ji, aapne to scene hi badal diya. And I said, kyun? He said, aap log jab जाते हैं poetry shows के लिए, आप रहते हैं 5-star hotel में, you know, और आप लोग महंगी गाड़ी में जाते हैं, और आप business साथ में ट्रैवल करते हैं, और हम लोग देखो अभी भी 2-star होटल में हमें ठहराया जाता है, लिफाफे में 1100 रुपये पकड़ा के दिया जाता है. And when he was saying all of that, I realized that he's coming from a very truthful place, because that has happened with shires, and that has happened not with the biggest of shires, but it still happens with people who are trying out sher o shairi. And in a way, I want this to change. I think all of us need to be on the same stage. Because we do have a crowd that likes to listen to both. I recently did a show where Wasim Barelvi Sahab was the headliner. And, when you listen to Wasim Sahab, he's like the epitome of sher o shairi. And there were people who were there to listen to him. And then there were people who were there to listen to me. And it is possible that we are both, being treated the same way, and we should be living life of a similar standard as well. So, yeah. I think that divide needs to change, because it's a very similar form of art. You go in front of a microphone and you are reciting poetry. Yeah.
That's a lovely thought. Let's hope that happens sometime.
Yes,
soon.
I mean, it happens to the greatest shires, but there are still people out there who are struggling and who think that they will never be able to make it cool, or they will never be able to live the life they want. Again, the whole commerce and art factor comes into play over there. And a lot of people think that in order to be a true shaयर or a true poet, आप फटे हुए कुर्ते और चप्पल में जाके झोला लटका के वहाँ पे अपनी कहानियाँ सुना रहे हो तो आप असली सच्चे शायर हो. अगर आप थोड़ा तैयार व्यार होके अच्छे लग के सुना रहे हो तो आप असली शायर नहीं हो. आई थिंक ये सब चीज़ें चेंज होनी चाहिए. इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट that we get out of that entire image that we have in our heads.
That's a good thought. What's coming next from Priya?
What's coming next for me? Hopefully the 2 books. I hope that I get to writing them very soon. I am doing a few live shows. I am touring. I hate using that word, touring India. No, I'm going to a few cities here and there and doing the last leg of my show called Ishq Hai. And that's it for now. And I think I'll see what comes later. Yeah.
I think the first year of the baby is the first thing.
Yes. I need to slow down and really, appreciate, because he's growing up so quickly. Like, I don't even know where the last 3 months have gone. So I really want to make sure. I might never get a chance at it again. I might not have another baby. So this is as much as this is my child's childhood, this is also my motherhood. So I'm very cognizant of that as well.
That's such a lovely thought. All the very best, Priya, for whatever comes ahead. And thank you for taking time out for this.
Thank you so much.